privilege to be here to share in this inaugural event with you and to share some of my thoughts about the power of communications as it applies to the individual cancer journey. I did start 50 years ago. This is my 50th year in communications. And I know what you're thinking, that one of these days you'll grow older and you'll have silver hair like this. But I can tell you, just wait a minute. This is 50 years in the communications business here, and each strand is a TV commercial, or it's a challenge, or it's a video that was done. And I've learned quite a lot about communications, but the first lesson was a strategic one, and that is that communications is really about driving the change in attitude in order to change behaviors, in order to change outcomes. And that mantra has been with me through all of those years, and it's the one that drives everything I do today. And I wanted to bring you some samples of my early work, but I couldn't get the cave walls into my SUV. So we have a little collage here. That's my dog, Ralph, up at the top, as you can see. Over here is a gentleman who just came out of a coma and heard about the HST. Canadian Airlines, you might remember them, they flew in the 19th century. During all this time and all of these commercials and all of these videos, I learned how the change of attitude and behavior and outcomes worked, whether it was for Labatt's Blue or General Motors or Tide detergent. In the case of Tide, for instance, it was a question of convincing people that Tide would do the job. Then the next thing that we did was convince them to buy it and try it. And then the outcome, of course, is that they learned what whiter than white really was. And the same was true of Labatt's and Chevrolet. You just don't put them together. I went on to do quite a number of corporate videos, and in the course of that, learned a lot about how people function. My early training in psychology was nothing compared to the lessons in psychology learned during all that kind of work. And much of it was in employee relations. And all those lessons I learned started to affect other work I did. And it was when I became involved with nonprofits that were helping people that I really got to get a lot of pleasure out of my work, whether it was kids in trouble with the law, or kids who needed a big brother or a big sister, or kids that needed help just getting to school, or getting the books, or getting the money to take the field trips. I became involved with addictions and helping people that were in the grip of alcohol or drug addictions, and worked with organizations that operated on love and where everyone helped everyone else to beat this kind of a problem. I got to go to Africa and work with a polio village and some kids in orphanages. And I had the privilege of photographing this little boy the first time he climbed onto a bed. He was 7 years old. He'd slept on a mud floor for the whole of his life up to that time. And then I met a group of ladies in a boat called Not a Breast. They were breast cancer survivors, and they had taken up dragon boating. And I became so enthralled with them that I decided to spend a year with their team from the very first meeting where people signed up to where they won the breast cancer challenge at the end of the year. I went to their practices, I went to events and races, but also interviewed a bunch of them individually and learned what their cancer journey was like. Charmaine told me that when she was diagnosed, she felt like she was in a bell jar. She couldn't hear anything. She was completely detached from the world. She was terrified, and she didn't even know whether she'd bother going back to the doctor. Margaret told me that she hoped that she would be able to get to her home and tell her family what she was dying of before she actually died. I'd call that despair, and that's how these people started their journey. But as the summer wore on, we saw all these events, we saw this spirit build, we saw all this positive energy happening with these people, and they were really having a wonderful time. They won the race, and we got to the end of the season. A group of them were together, and I said, let me get this straight. You're telling me that you're all better off for having had cancer? And they said, yes. And I thought, how do we reconcile where they are at the end of this 1 year to where they were at the beginning? And what can we do with that information? And how can we use that to change other people's lives? How can we move that message up the cancer journey to right near the beginning, where it can affect the people who are so terrified? Well, you may know that people in business and in science and in medicine frequently aren't convinced about anything until they see numbers. They're not interested in anecdotes. They're not interested in the soft, mushy stuff. So Dr. Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania decided what he had to do was to start to measure positive attitude and measure happiness. And he wrote a book called Authentic Happiness, in which he proves that happiness heals, and he has the numbers to go with it. He proves that positive attitude staves off illness in many cases, and if it does break through, it shortens the time that the person has that illness. So I thought, now we're getting somewhere. So what I wanted to do was to build a palette of colors where each color represented a different organization or a different point of view, to be able to take this whole story and use it to help the newly diagnosed woman deal with her disease. Some of these colors were muted, pastels. Wellspring is a case in point, a wonderful volunteer-driven organization. They run about 70 different programs for people with cancer and their families, and all sorts of different programs, but essentially passive programs. It might be art therapy, it might be music therapy, might be Tai Chi. And with them is a young lady by the name of Jody Steele. Jody's a physiotherapist who lost her mother to cancer, and at that very moment dedicated herself to the physiotherapy side of the cancer journey, to exercise and what could be done. I worked with an organization in Hamilton called Wellwood, completely volunteer run, woven into the fabric of Hamilton. They work within the Juravinsky Cancer Clinic, they work in their own facility, and they work virtually throughout the community in church halls and gymnasiums. I worked with breast cancer support services in Burlington. And when I made a video for them, they insisted that I call the video The Gift, because they're looking at the upside of this cancer journey. And I must say that the reason they did that is because while adversity is the thing we wish on no one, adversity is the thing on which we build character. Adversity is the thing that allows us to discover within ourselves what we're really about. And that's what's happened to these ladies. And you can see they're a pretty miserable lot. So let me tell you about my hero, Kim Pace. Kim Pace is a speech therapist, works with children in Burlington. She was diagnosed with cervical cancer in the fall of 2007. She went through the course of treatment, chemo, radiation, went back to her doctor. He said, I'm sorry, this didn't work. I'm going to have to turn you over to a salvage surgeon. Make a note of that, salvage surgeon. Can be a harsh business. She went to the surgeon, who said essentially, we've got two doors, door number one, door number two. Behind door number one, I'm going to scoop you out like a cantaloupe. I'm going to run 2 tubes out of you. I'm going to give you 6 months of ugly recovery. I'm going to give you a 50-50 chance of surviving. Or you can pick door number two. Door number two, you're dead in a year. These are harsh choices. Kim said, I'll take dead in a year. And she went online, and then she went off to a holistic clinic in Atlanta, Georgia, for a 10-day visit. She told me, I went there to learn how to die well. In 5 days, she's learning how to live well. In 10 days, and she doesn't know where this came from, in 10 days, she'd committed to do an Ironman competition. She's not even an athlete. She had friends who were athletes, but Kim was not an athlete. So She said she got a group together of her friends, and 10 of them said, we'll do it with you. And another 25 of them said, we'll jump up and down and cheer. And off they went. She trained for 2 years to get in shape to do this. And I want you to know what it is that they did. 4 kilometers swimming with 3,000 or 4,000 other people. You all jump in the water at the same time. They look like piranha fish. If you don't get kicked to death and you get out of the water at the end of 4 kilometers, you towel yourself off and you get on a bike and you ride 90 kilometers that way and then 90 kilometers back this way. Jackie Mason would say, I was already here. Then you've got a minute to have a bottle of water. And the good news is, of course, you stepped off the bike and you can hardly move. Good news is you don't have to walk. The bad news is you have to run 42 kilometers. And if you don't do this in 17 hours, you're nobody. So it didn't even happen if you don't do it in 17 hours. Well, they did it in 17 hours. All 10 of them, all the 10 ladies plus Kim. And I think they're all crazy, but crazy like a fox. And while they were at it, this group, they called themselves the Iron Dames. And just in their spare time, they raised over $150,000 so that Jody Steele could run her exercise program at Wellspring. It's almost incestuous how these people work among one another, and they're doing all these wonderful things, and it's all on a volunteer basis. So I look at this group of women and I think, why don't we just turn the world over to them for the next 2,000 years? There could be nothing but improvement. They're a wonderful group of people. And if you remember the story of Little Red Riding Hood and the big wolf, this is the big wolf. Along comes the Canadian Cancer Society, one of the most influential bodies of its kind in the country, able to raise huge amounts of money. And they develop a campaign, and the lead item in that campaign is a public service announcement in which they have invited people who have lost family members to cancer or cancer patients themselves to come into a room, a studio, and talk to cancer as if cancer is sitting there. And what comes out of this is such anger and such rage, to me, such poison, that when I think of this woman newly diagnosed that I'm trying to help with all these positive stories, there's no way she's not going to be scared to death by this thing that is being run, this monstrosity being run by the Canadian Cancer Society. So that's just a big obstacle in our way, something that you should notice. But let's get back to the good news. This is Dr. Don McKenzie. He's a sports medicine doctor from the University of British Columbia. He has so many letters after his name, they just run right off the page. 12 years ago, he, as Kim has done, flew in the face of conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom said, a woman who's lost a breast or two or lymph nodes is very fragile and she should never stress the upper part of her body. And he said that's a bunch of jive. So he went out to find an activity to prove his point, and he picked dragon boating. Upper body repetitive exercise was great for that, and it had some side benefits, teamwork, camaraderie, all of that sort of thing. He put a team together, and he studied them for a year. They went into competitions. He trained them. At the end of the year, nothing but improvement. No setbacks from anyone. And that's how you start a brush fire. And what happened is this activity started to spread around the world with the help of the people in Vancouver, and they made it happen. And so what that led to, this wonderful activity of dragon boating, that's what it looks like. International Breast Cancer Dragon Boat Festival in Peterborough in June of this last year. And I thought, well, I have the story of Not a Breast, and I have the story of Kim and her friends, but here are 2,000 stories of people confronting breast cancer and making their lives better. And yet, there was no plan to record this, no plan to broadcast this. It was just going to go into the ether. So I took 3 cameramen and we went up to Peterborough for 4 days to photograph this event and to talk to people there and to put ourselves in a position to share this with other folks. This is a team from South Africa in a parade that they had. There were many events that went on during that time. This is what it looks like when they were practicing and getting ready for the races. And these are faces. You look at the face on the right, woman is practically ready to explode with joy. I got in with a camera. They got in with breast cancer. And these people are having the time of their lives. Now, just in case you think that we've gone all Pollyanna on you, and we don't recognize that people die from breast cancer. Of course they do. Fewer every year, I'm happy to say. The part of the 30-minute documentary on this event that I'm proudest of, and it is frankly the most beautiful, is a tribute to the people who have not survived. And it's a very important part of these festivals whenever they occur. And there was original, beautiful music written for it. It was absolutely spectacular. And all these ladies create a raft out of all of the canoes, and they all carry pink carnations into the raft, and they throw them out. It's a very moving thing. But not only is it a celebration of the people who have not survived, it's also a celebration of life and of these people and what they're doing with their lives. This lady's Diana Santangelo. What fun she was. An Italian lady, full of the Italian personality. And she wasn't able to paddle, but she was having a terrific time there and being interviewed by everyone. We had to practically line up to get to her. Diana passed away 3 weeks after this picture. And you know, when you think about what we're trying to do, it's not just about quality of life. It's also about quality of death. And I've done work with hospice, and so I know what quality of death is about. And I know that this woman went to her death full of happiness and sweetness as a result of this experience. If she wasn't part of this dragon boat thing, I'm sure it would have been a very different life for her. So what I want people to understand is that there are these activities happening, and they're happening as a result of people volunteering. And they get together and they share their stories and they do their speeches, and they honor their dead and they celebrate what they found in life. And we need to share that with other people. We need to get that experience out to other people because it is truly a beautiful thing. And now, you look at this, you know, that's not very much money, but that's all I had. And it's got to last me till next Tuesday. My wife's sitting out here. She's probably thinking, where'd you get all that money? Money is what this is all about. Princess Margaret Hospital Foundation has 30 people who raise $50 million. And that's just one hospital. We know about people strapping on their running shoes and getting pledges and going out millions of dollars, all to go into research. Well, we think of research as something that's going to find the breast cancer cure and then they're going to pack up and go home. That's not so. Research is an industry. Research is forever. We need to put more money into these supportive care facilities. We need more money to help people see the positive side. A positive attitude can bring positive behavior that can bring positive outcomes. Thank you very much.